Howdy folks, Mr. Moran here. I've made this little video about trench warfare just to reinforce some of the history behind the warfare that was absolutely so uh, deadly, yet very ineffective. Okay, so I pose a question to you, how long do you take a shower? The inevitable answer, or the typical answer, I should say, usually is about a 15 to 20 minute shower. Some people take really long showers, some people take really, really quick showers, but the average person takes a 15 to 20 minute shower. Now, we're not talking about water conservation or anything like that. What I'm more interested in is what happens to your fingers and toes. Inevitably, water, we are made of water. And what happens is our bodies cannot absorb any more water, so it becomes the skin of our bodies become wrinkled, crinkled, and we wind up looking like the crypt keeper. So imagine that feeling of being almost oversaturated. Your body is oversaturated with water for an extended period of time. What unfortunately is going to happen is the flesh, your flesh, the person's flesh, would start to separate. The tendons would start to separate, the muscles and fat cells would start to break down. And unfortunately, you would lose part of those limbs or some of that limb that was submerged in water. That is exactly what happened during World War I to many of the soldiers who endured sitting in a trench. And you see here that the barbed wire on one end is there for your protection, the soldier's protection. Then there's a fire step. If you stand up here, you level your gun and then you fire. If the enemy is attacking, you want to make sure that they don't get to this barbed wire. If you're attacking, well, guess what? You have to get over this, over the barbed wire, and out into no man's land. But there's an interesting thing right here. It's called a duckboard. Below this usually is where rainwater is going to collect. And you're digging 6-7 feet into the ground. Any groundwater is going to fill this trench up. And where are you going to go? You can't go out. You're going to get shot. You can't go back because you're disobeying orders. You have to stand there and you wait. You could dig even deeper to try to mine or sap your enemy, but that also isn't going to go well. In some circumstances, in some battles, this does work, but 9 times out of 10 is not effective. Trenches are not just a straight trench or a straight hole, all right, or line of holes dug. All right, it's very complex. You see the artillery in the back here in the rear. Then you have support trenches. Then you have frontline support trenches. The frontline trench, wire obstacles, barbed wire, which can sometimes be electrified, and then no man's land. Very hard to communicate anything from this position to this position, to your position in the frontline trench. Pigeons would be used pretty frequently to communicate. Once you go over the top, there's no running back. In some armies during World War I, if you disobeyed a direct order, the officer had every right to shoot you, and you would die a coward's death. Your spouse, your family would be greatly besmirched or discredited in the home front, and your name would be stricken from any monuments to commemorate said battle. Like I said, life in a trench is not a pleasant one. Here you have soldiers in the German army waiting for an attack, sitting around, complete with, the firing line, a little dugout, And these interesting canisters you see lined here, these are all gas masks. Invariably, gas will be used pretty frequently towards the middle of this war and the end of this war on both sides. Even if the trench was shelled and you somehow survived, you still had to hold that trench. There are 5 guys in this trench, which is filled with muck, mud, and God knows what other diseases. They are holding a machine gun nest. This man right here has a machine gun, and these guys are the support, probably carrying ammo and messages back and forth. Forests, huge forests, would be devastated throughout World War I. Beautiful forests that had dotted the landscape of France, Belgium, Germany, Russia, and even the southern part in Italy and the Swiss Alps. The dead invariably would not be buried on the battlefield. They would be taken to the reserve trenches and piled up, almost like wood. Here you have, after a snow fall, piles of dead bodies that unfortunately would attract vermin, rats. And the rats would get to be the size of your small dogs, large cats, and would be that brazen to steal food or even start to bite soldiers in their sleep just because they wanted something to eat. A lot of times, extra rations would be used to bait the rats, and then the rats would be caught, killed, and then eaten by the soldiers. It was fresh meat, a lot better than, the rotten, spoiled, canned meat that they may be getting. I'm not saying they're getting any supply of rations at that time. Here you have a group of soldiers who caught a whole mess of rats. There's at least 20, 25, if not maybe even 30 rats that are strung up by their tails that would be eaten or just killed to stop the spread of disease. If you were wounded and stuck in a trench, the rats would come and start to eat you, either the wounded flesh or the bandage. They would start to eat you, and you were alive for this. So the rats, for as cute and cuddly as they look during World War I, were not the friend of many soldiers. And then, oh yes, the water. Here we are standing in a trench. This man right here, who's looking down at us through the camera, is standing in about 3 or 4 feet of water, and he has to stand there. Unfortunately, like I said, what happens to your flesh when you're standing, running in this kind of water, is it begins to get ulcerated and fall off the bone. Now, the next picture is a little graphic, so I will warn you, it is nasty. It's something called trench foot, and it actually still can happen today in the military as well. Here you have most of the toes have become ulcerated and been chopped off. The big toe is black, and that's not because this is a black and white photo. That is because it is dead flesh. A rat would have a field day with something like this, gnawing at this person's feet, and yes, they are alive. You can also see the heel bone as well too, that has become protruding through the ulcerated flesh. The wounds of World War I will leave many, many scars, whether they be amputations, facial scars, or even mental scars. Every soldier who went into those trenches will step away from World War I and any war. Any soldier who steps into a battlefield will walk away with mental scars, what we today call post-traumatic stress disorder, but during World War I they called shell shock. Now we're going to briefly talk a little bit about some of the weapons, just to get through that. Like I said, the gas mask is going to become the best friend of the soldiers. Fortunately, the early days of the gas mask were ineffective. They were very, very, very problematic. And they were so primitive that it would literally be a square cloth, kind of like a bandana, a little bit thicker than a bandana, that the soldiers would have to urinate on to neutralize the gas. Problem is that neutralizes the gas from getting into your nose or your mouth, but not into your eyes. So, depending on the type of gas, it would affect your eyes. Uh, Lacrimates or tear gas were very popular. Phosgene, mustard, and chlorine gas were also very popular. And mustard gas is not gas made of mustard, but it leaves a cloud and a sticky like substance that sticks to your clothes that literally burns the flesh off of your body. Not a gas, but a very, very, very nasty way to treat another human being. You also have grenades, which were becoming very popular, first perfected in the American Civil War. The stick grenades, the pineapple grenades, as well. Like I said, the barbed wire, machine guns, which became very, very popular. That's a water cooled jacket on that barrel there. And, of course, the tanks. Tanks would first be used by the British, and there they will get the name the tank. Okay, the code word was water tank, and the name stuck. Once the British use it, the Germans see an opportunity. They steal the technology, and fortunately or unfortunately, the Germans will not know how to use the tank as a defensive weapon. The British, on the other hand, will exploit it only as an offensive weapon. So tanks will only be used for attacking, not defending. Now you have some colorized photos as well. Then we have the rifles. The Americans will use the Springfields, the 1903s. The British will use this rifle on the bottom here. That's called the Lee Enfield. And the Germans will use the Kar 98. All are bolt action. And the Lee Enfield is a 10-round clip. We've, of course, talked about the U-boats and the submarines. Submarines will be used for secretive and almost covert warfare. The Germans will use the U-boats to harass and destroy the trade amongst the Allies and defend their shores. Depth charges will also be used and perfected in World War I as well, too, and that is a timed charge that is dropped, it sinks, and at a certain depth it explodes. If you can break the pressure of a submarine's chamber or the submarine's cabin, you will destroy the submarine, sink it below crush depth where the rest of the submarine will be destroyed to smithereens. And this will be perfected in World War I, it'll be used in World War II, and is still continued to be used today. And then inadvertently airplanes as well too. Okay, you have the D3, which is used by the Germans. This is the most famous plane probably because it's the plane of the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, who is actually shot down and killed in World War I. But needless to say, airplanes will actually be used more for reconnaissance than actual combat, known as a dogfight. And they're still called dogfights today. You'll see lots and lots of different planes. The Americans will perfect the Sopwith Camel. The British will also use the Sopwith Camel. And the Germans will use the D3. Here you have a dogfight painting and some of the flying aces of World War I. America's flying ace was Eddie Rickenbacker. Here you have Manfred von Richthofen of Germany. He will die in World War I. He will actually live. Eddie Rickenbacker will live well into World War II and actually be shot down not only in World War I but also in World War II. So that's a quick overview of some of the trench warfare and some interesting things about World War I. I hope you learned something from this. Remember to do your daily questions. Take care.